Hey everyone, Todd Schutte with the Bona e-learning team. Welcome to our third edition, our third session of Bona Sport Techniques for custom residential and commercial. Joined today once again by Bob Mohr, who's our studio technician, also one of the machine service technicians, fixing your sanding machines every day. He really does a lot of the behind the work scenes to help carry these out, plus he's a good on-screen talent as well. And also then once again our sport expert, Phil Sanchez, Senior Regional Sport Sales Manager. So really happy to have you with us as well, because you brought a lot of these techniques to us with your experience and your contacts with your customers. So we really appreciate that. We never thought when we started this little project to do a sport techniques webinar that we'd end up with 3 sessions. But we ended up with so much good material for you guys that it just worked out that way. So we really hope you also took away little tidbits from each of these that's going to help grow your business in the residential and commercial side. And we learned a ton too, right? Every time we do a training, every time we do a school, every time we're out on a job site with you guys, we're always learning stuff. And you know, definitely one of the things we try to do and reinforce at our schools is take notes, right? Make your notes, don't try to keep everything up here. And whether you're doing that in a notebook, you also have maybe a company meeting once a month where you're getting everybody's ideas. Every job you're learning something. Every one of these 16 panels we learned something. So Bob, looking back over this project, which I know took a lot longer than we thought, but was also maybe funner than we thought too. What are some of the key takeaways for you?
Really just mixing all of our products together I thought was pretty cool. Like seeing when we put down this Spartan helmet logo, we did the stain first and then we put the paint on top. So just really mixing those kind of 2 products and seeing them kind of work together. When we put down the stain on the bottom level and the paint on top, it really just popped that paint out more. And then really even like the sheen levels on them. So we did a satin on the outside and a gloss on top. Never really would have thought to mix those 2 together, but it really popped out that logo. It's really cool, like when you could see all these different products kind of come together and how they worked.
Yeah, so I think that's what was nice for us, right, is we've done a lot of these things out on some of the sport jobs we've done. I mean, we've done straight paint stencils, we've done some custom staining out in the 3-point areas. We've mixed some of the stuff, we've done some glaze, but we really kind of had some discussions during this project on how do we mix those up even more. And even on some of the stencils, leaving some blank space, you know, and just having the beauty of the natural wood shine through as well. So I think that was a fun part of it as well. But again, I think you guys are going to see a lot of mixed media, if we can call it that, on how we use stain, paint, glaze, and mixtures of those to create a bunch of different effects. Phil, how about your side? I mean, you've been still traveling out, seeing your sport guys while we've been doing this, but what are some of the things you've seen here?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is how much can transfer, carry over that, can be done on commercial and residential. And I think it just opens up so many possibilities. And I've learned a lot of new things too that I can now take over back to the sports side, which I think is going to be pretty exciting. So that's been a really neat part of it. But, going back to, the fundamentals of practice and learning this process, I think it's going to be really key for you guys out there, is really just spend the time. Find your area you can kind of practice and test and get really good at, and kind of find your style and maybe go after that style and just have that specialty. But there's a lot of different things you can do. It's really exciting to see what's going to be done, and I think that's what's going to be best, to see what comes after this, and that's what I'm excited about.
I think one of the things I learned and took away was, all the time we've been doing live schools, we've done custom stain designs where you're not staining the whole floor, you're taking tape, creating a design in the floor with the tape, and then staining certain segments of that design. And the question always comes up of how do I get a crisp line, especially when I'm working on, red oak, white oak, something where I've got a hard grain, soft grain, and I tend to get some bleed, especially down that soft grain. So we saw a lot of input out on other social media, on Bona sites, through our training program, different things that guys do. So we tried out 4 or 5 different methods to try to get crisp stain lines. We think we got a couple that really work pretty well. So we'll go over those, but again, take your notes away from these webinars, use these as a long-term reference, and we think you guys will have a lot of success on transferring some of this knowledge over to custom residential and commercial jobs. So we're going to get ready to take you through each of these panels. some of the key things that we'd like you to take away, kind of the process we went through to create each of these panels. So we'll take a quick break, be right back, and we'll start going through them. So on this particular panel, we did, kind of a standard checkerboard design. And this is something that's pretty common for guys to do out on floors, is take tape, do kind of a standard geometrical design like this, and then either paint or stain or whatever. But we mixed a couple different elements. So we used some Super Sport dark blue paint. Then we also made a 16:1 glaze out of it and did those as interchanging squares to offer some contrast. We could have done every panel. So we could have done all of these, this paint, these all glaze, and not have any natural wood looking through. So we've got kind of three elements there then that we wanted to use and still have some natural wood shining through as well. Paint, we used a couple coats. We wanted to make sure we got good coverage, so 2 thin coats to get the coverage there. Used a couple coats of the glaze to get the color we wanted as well. But Phil, how about some of the other stuff on the glaze?
Yeah, definitely with the glaze. I mean, you can see we've used the same blue color here to achieve the glaze here. Multiple coats, it is a 16:1 ratio. And we like that with the darker colors just so you get a more consistent, cleaner look, and achieving multiple thin coats to achieve a darker color. So if the customer wanted this a little bit more dark, it's closer to this, just add another coat or two of that glaze to really make that a little bit more darker. Other thing to keep in mind while you're working through that, we just had tape here. So, you want to work clean, you want to start and end on a mask. But when you stop, you might have a puddle here or there. Make sure you're pulling that up, keeping that off, just so it doesn't come back on somehow. Liquid goes to liquid and it'll try to pull back into itself. So you just want to prevent that from happening. That's another nice trick to do there. And then also paying attention to the glaze or the sheen that you're going to use, because using a glaze is going to make it pop a little bit more. It's going to show a little bit more, whereas the satin kind of looks really going to kind of dull it, but really make it real nice and clean. So depending on what you're looking to achieve, just keeping that in mind and having those expectations out there before you coat it.
Yeah, and same thing, you can see, again, what he was talking about with the glaze, where we pulled it off just onto the tape. We didn't have a real wide mask with tape and plastic. So because we had a puddle here and didn't wipe it up, it bled back out onto the floor, or flowed and leveled back out, so we have darker areas on the sides there. So that's definitely something you want to watch. And then, as he mentioned with the sheen levels, same thing with the paint, right? If you put glossier finish on, it's going to darken everything up or make it appear darker. If you put, as you get flatter and flatter, it's going to kind of mute things, kind of blend everything out a little more. And then think long term also, right? When your customers are going to be living on this, right? So some people think, well, gloss is clean, it's shiny, it's nice, it pops everything, but it also shows everything later. And Phil knows that, and all his customers from the sport side, where everything is still so high gloss. So it's going to show all the scratches, all the scuffs, and I would still try to move your customers more and more towards satin or extra matte products, especially when you're doing designs on the floor, because everything's going to look nicer longer with flatter sheens. So that's it on this one. Again, a basic geometric design just using painter's tape, masking those off, making sure you do a little thumb mark anywhere where you have an overlap so you don't get bleeds under that, and then using paint and glaze and different sheens of finish to achieve that final look.
Hey guys, so we're back here now looking at another design, and Bobby will kind of cover the paint. What I want to first address is this really cool orange look that we got with a stain, a custom stain color. Using orange Cortline's paint with DriFast natural stain, we were able to use a 1 to 16, 2 ounces per quart. This is kind of the ratio we used here. But what you can see is you got a really cool orange kind of tones and all that soft grain to kind of give that really, really pretty look on that with that orange. You can achieve that with any colors. I mean, any color that's out there, any custom color that you want, you can kind of achieve the same type of look on your floor. You can also change the ratios. I mean, this is a lighter ratio. If you want to get much darker, you can definitely move that up to 2 parts paint to 1 part stain. But keep it in mind, whatever that majority of that product's going to be in that mixture, you want to treat it that way. So if you end up using more paint than stain, you definitely want to let it sit 24 hours, then abrade it before you coat it. Another thing we want to mention here too is that we stained it, and then we put 2 coats of intense sealer on it, and then we did the paint.
Yeah, so before we put the decal down, like Phil said, we had the sealer on there just to make nice crisp lines on here to get the build. But what you'll see here is this is our Court Lines paint, and then this is our water base, our Super Sport paint. So really with the Court Lines, we only did 2 coats with it, more or less because it's one of the darker colors. With the darker colors, you could maybe get away with doing less coats of it. So you can see nice coverage. Really, it's the coverage and hiding the grain of the wood is the kind of name of the game with this. So covered really nice in 2 coats, and then you go over to the water base. We did 1, 2, and 3 coats. With whites and your lighter colors, they're going to take more coats to get that coverage that you need. But one thing you might also notice too is it's kind of like a little bit of an orange hue, and really it's the backdrop of the stain that's below it is kind of pulling that out. It is truly white, but that's something you got to keep in mind is what's your backdrop you're going to go against.
So with this look, what we did to achieve the final result was the stain was first. Typically you want to water pop that floor too, so water pop your floor, stain, and then let that dry. We put 2 coats of seal, intense seal on that, and then we did our painting with the Court Lines. We want to abrade that, water-based. If you're within the time frame, you go to hot coat that, and then your 2 coats of water-based finish on top. And one nice little tip too on this, if you are going white, an easy way to help you cut down on the number of coats is on that first coat, use a beige or a gray as like a seal coat or a primer, or even add a little gray to your white on that first coat. That'll help knock down the number of total coats to cover with some of our water-based paints as well. Hey guys, okay, so we're back here to talk a little bit more about glaze. My favorite part is this glaze process. So as you can see here, you might notice a slight difference here from the last time we did this, and we'll start with that just because it is important when you use glaze to treat it carefully. Depending on dry times, all those things, you might need to abrade it before you get your next coat on there. If you are using a glaze, you've got to be really careful about abrading this because it is, it's sitting pretty high on raw wood. So if you put even a maroon pad on there with a little bit of friction with your buffer, it's going to take that color off. And so you got to be real careful about that. If you do need to go back and abrade, I always like recommending a coat of sealer on top just to kind of protect it so that when it comes back, you're abrading that seal clear coat versus the color itself. The next thing I want to point out, which is kind of neat here, and it shows how the different ratios and different number of coats can affect the overall look. When you start here on the bottom, that's a 1 to 16 ratio with 1 coat. And then you've got 2 coats, 3 coats. And I think it's good to start, and that's always what I recommend, is with the darker colors, to use a lighter ratio to achieve a darker color with multiple coats. It is more challenging. I think that's one of the things we've learned over the years is if you try to get that dark color on that first coat, it's going to be a little bit more challenging to work with. You're going to have a lot more streaks, more lines. It just creates a little bit more challenges when if you just take your time and start with lighter to get to darker, you're going to have a much more consistent, more beautiful color at that. Also, as you're using this and kind of getting creative on how you want to add this to a room, you do need to have space to fulfill this process properly. You need to have your mask area. You need to have your little bit of area where you're coming off and on the mask. So if you're trying to do a full room, you got to keep that in mind that you might not be able to get all the way up to baseboard when you're finishing your lines because you don't want to have turn marks or heavy spots that are going to show up. So, in that design process, maybe make room or make time for a border just to really clean that up and make it really, really pop. Outside of that, I think you look at this and it hopefully is kind of creating some new ideas and new opportunities for you in your business, but there's a lot of fun things you can do with glaze.
Hey everyone, welcome to this panel. I don't know exactly what to call this, but it's just really some free-form thinking, right? And that's part of the fun of doing something like this and thinking outside the box is we don't always have to have stencils. We don't always have to have a set design. Sometimes you can just kind of let your imagination run wild and do whatever you want. So we just did a tape and Super Sport paint design here. So we used, like 4 different widths of tape, and I put down tape even on the sealed floor first, and then did a coat of red and just kind of all over the place. Coat of red, and then I put down a little more tape, did a coat of navy blue, little more tape, a lot more tape actually, and then did 3 more colors with the yellow, the orange, the white, to kind of end things off. And then we're going to peel all the tape and kind of see how this thing looks, see what's revealed as this comes up. But the point is, I mean, think outside the box, think way outside the box. And really kind of some inspiration on this, if you remember in webinar number 2, the piece with Mohr, you know, actually hiring and bringing in a pro artist to create different stuff on the floor. So there are people out there who this is their style of art, and they could easily create something like this for you on the floor. But maybe even you could do it by yourself, right? You never know when you're going to uncover your creative side until you go out and try some stuff like this. So we're going to do a bit of a reveal. And I guess one of the keys is just going to make sure to get all of the tape off. So you can see a little bit of kind of how this thing is going to unfold and how my lower levels of paint, lower layers, are coming through as we're taking off some of this tape, taking off some of the top colors, and how everything's going to end up just as big mixtures.
Hey guys, okay, so we're back here now. One of the other things we want to talk about are solid painted areas, and that's, you know, we see that a lot in sport, but we also are seeing more and more of that in residential and commercial, and so it is certainly an option to go on and completely paint an entire floor. There are a few things you want to make note of before you do that, is that you are going to lose a lot of that. I mean, you're going to lose all of that grain texture as far as what you can see. You might still see some of the texture with it, depending on how thick you get with your paint, but it is definitely a desired look if that's what they're looking for and you can't achieve it. It's also important to note that when you're doing this, you know, wood is still going to be wood. And so if you do have a house that's not really climate controlled, or you experience a lot of humidity changes, you know, that wood's going to expand and move a little bit. So with paint, you might start to see some cracking there. It's going to do what it's designed to do. It's supposed to fracture, but you might get some white lines there. Another way to kind of still get that look but not have those lines is with glaze. And so this is where, you know, we kind of want to compare the two, where you can really get a good look with paint, or you can achieve that same color with the glaze, but still show that real beauty of the wood. And that's what we like. We love the wood. I mean, we love to see that texture, and that's why we like glaze so much, is that you can get some of these really cool painted kind of looks, but with the glaze and still see that grain, and that's what we really like about this.
Yeah. Any tips on painting large areas like that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely want to stay with the grain. I mean, you want to keep your passes as best as you can with that, so that you're not creating too many side marks, not keeping heavy. Again, thin to win when you're doing paint, so that you get a nice looking floor with not too much stipple, not too much ridge. All those things come into play. And so, you know, pay attention to what the instructions say for the type of roller that we recommend based on that paint. Can you think of anything else there?
No, just on the finishing side. So whether you have a large area of glaze or paint, and again, if we're dealing with strip or plank flooring, we're probably going to apply it with the T-bar. It's just easiest that way. And the T-bar, with the way it flows through the product and gives you, you know, parallel striations of finish along with your flooring grain and stuff, a lot less tendency for that to show up. Whereas if you roll on top of something really solid, and if you leave some of that stipple pattern on there, it definitely shows up more. But also with the T-bar, whenever you guys are using this, and this goes for even a regular, you know, stained or natural floor too, when you're rolling this or when you're pulling this through, you're always creating a little ridge with the top side of your T-bar. And that can definitely show up on something that's shiny or something that's solid as a shinier spot. And it doesn't matter if it's high gloss finish or if it's satin. If you've got a thicker ridge of product right there, it can show up as a shiny area. So once in a while we'll go through, we'll watch that, especially, you know, if we're doing a big logo in a gym, Or again, if we're putting finish on a room, we'll want to watch the top of that T-bar, and if we think we got a thick area or a runner up there, we're going to come back and do what we call a feather pass just to knock that down. So if we're putting our finish down, I'll get a little, just get my start here. So again, as I'm running this down, right, even if I'm not taking too much of my puddle there and not really doing that on purpose, but if I think I've got a heavy ridge there, I want to pad this out, and then I want to take my T-bar and lay it perfectly perpendicular and just make a light run down the floor, just fingertips. And all I'm trying to do is knock that little ridge down. Again, no matter how good you think you are at T-barring, you're always leaving a little ridge there. And it definitely shows up more when we've got something like this, where we've got some color to it to make that show up. And then of course, sometimes, you know, if you're not paying careful enough attention and or you're just slopping it a bit, you'll get, you know, a lot of finish run up over the top of there. So again, I can just pad out when I think I've got those heavier areas, lay it perpendicular, just fingertip pressure to draw it across and feather that out.
You know, Todd, and this actually brings up an interesting point too that I want to make sure, you know, you all see. We're using water-based finish here, which is going to dry clear, and it's going to keep your colors, especially if you're doing custom vibrant colors, it's going to keep them vibrant. If you are coating with an oil base, this is important as well, because if you have those heavy spots that you're not coming out, you're going to get a darker amber color across and streaky across your colors. So that's always important to pay attention to this process to get those out so you don't have that discoloration.
Yeah, good point. So again, a lot of times in sport, right, they'll even apply oil modified with the T-bar, maybe a little heavier T-bar, but same thing Phil's saying is you're getting that heavier spot. So not only will it might be a different gloss level, but it's also going to have more color, and you might have double the threat of it showing up.
And also to that point, if you are having a specific custom color and you are using oil, know it's going to change that color just a little bit. So, you know, it does add to it. So you got to keep that in mind as well.
So again, this is just to drive home the point that when you've got large areas of stain, glaze, or not stain, but paint or glaze, and now you're dealing with a design or a color in the floor, it doesn't hide as much as your, you know, the natural wood grain in your floor is going to. So it might be necessary to go back, watch those heavy marks that are coming off the top of your applicator, right, and go back and feather them out as needed. And again, I say keep your applicator perpendicular. I don't want to run it as an angle, because if I run it as an angle, at an angle, it's going to cut into that finish again on that top side and leave the exact same mark. So pat it out really well. I don't want to have excess finish in there. Lay it perpendicular and then just fingertip pressure, draw it across. All I'm trying to do is flatten out that heavy ridge that's flowing across there. And I know I'm not cutting in and doing my feathering on the end, so I'm probably going to have some turn marks here, but that is not what we're trying to show on this particular demo. But just for you guys who are going to nitpick that, there, I feathered out my turn marks. But again, same thing on glaze. Now glaze, because you know, you do see some of the grain, it is going to hide things a little more than if I'm doing it on solid paint. But still, when I've got a darker color, lighter color, I mean, you may have seen some of the same stuff on, you know, if you've done a real dark or a real light floor with Brazilian cherry or maple, they can show more than, say, a oak floor as well. So this might be a good part of your overall T-barring application approach anyway. Just to do a little better job with that is watch those heavy marks coming off the top. And if you need to, go back and just feather those out of the floor. That's our suggestion on T-barring over across wide areas of paint and or glaze. Just watch for that little ridge that might build up off the top of your applicator. Go do a little feather pass, everything should come out beautiful. Okay, now we're back to our panel that's, again, a custom tape and stain job, and not really taping a design in the floor, but we taped out, you know, boards and followed board seams. We got off some boards even, like you see here where we came across this board to do the white just in here. Same thing with this, we stained this white and cut it off here where really our natural board seam runs like that. So you don't always have to follow the lines, right? Again, this design was inspired by Jared Paris out in California, who I saw, he did a floor like this probably 3 or 4 years ago at a dentist's office, did this incredible tape job and stain job. And on this one we used white, graphite, Jacobean, and nutmeg. So we got 4 different stain colors plus some natural colors in the floor. And again, it's just thinking outside the box. Can I do a quote-unquote stain job, but also use tape and make it look like, you know, different widths of boards in the floor, maybe different species of boards in the floor without really changing anything else. So again, this panel was created with tape and running tape down board seams, not following board seams, using 4 different colors of stain. Then we put intent seal, 2 coats of intent seal over everything just to kind of bring out those stain colors a little more, and then 2 different sheens of finish just to show what that would do with the colors.
Okay, we're going to go over this panel now with some of these smaller decals that we had. First thing I'm going to point out is some of the colors that we have. So the darker colors, they really covered in 2 to 3 coats. The yellow, we didn't have any beige or any of the lighter colors to help build these up. So we had to do about 4 or 5 coats with the yellow, but the beige is probably like the best way to go if you're going to have any of the whites, the yellows, just to kind of get that build, and then you'll do less of the yellows. So what we did initially is a natural floor, so we did 2 coats of intent seal to get a nice build, and that's also really what helped get the nice coverage that we had here. So we did a gloss on this side and then a matte on this side. I really liked how these turned out. The gloss does great kind of highlighting the color in the paints. The matte also does a really good job where it kind of masks from the different angles that you see. So I really like how this turned out, and we're going to move on to the next panel.
All right, so here we are now talking about and seeing 2-part stencils. A lot of things to pay attention to when you're doing this. You know, you can obviously makes the job a lot easier, but it is a template. It is, you know, just an example, or not an example, but it just gives you that kind of that footprint on what you can do. But you don't have to just do that. You can do so many more, you know, looks with it. But there are a few things you want to pay attention to when you are using a 2-part stencil. Paying attention to detail is always going to be one of the keystone things you want to do, because you got a lot of small parts, a lot of little areas that, you know, as you are painting and taking off stencils, you know, be real careful how you're taking those off, because if you try to rush that, you could end up ripping off paint that you don't want. Now you're creating more issues to go back and have to fix. So just being careful with how you know, put your first one on, put your second one on, and paying attention to detail there is going to help make that process a lot smoother. Another thing we want to kind of point out that you might see here, and we kind of left it this way, is to show that when you do have multiple coats of paint or multiple colors and stencils, you're going to start to get some shoulders or some edges that once you go back and if you abrade it, you're going to have a high spot. When you hit that, it's going to take that color off and it's going to reveal the color below it. So you always want to be careful about how that works as well and how you see that, and going back, touching up. Maybe even after you pull that first stencil off, you get a real, you know, kind of a fine abrasive and just kind of smooth those edges down, so you cut that edge down and make it more of a ramp, so you don't have too much of a change there in the level of the paint.
Yeah, and what Phil said, usually guys will use, again, 150, 180 grit paper to just, you know, again, shave down the edge of that shoulder so that we have, as he said, a ramp and not a cliff. But then you also want to be careful about abrading. This is one thing that, you know, Bobby pointed out earlier, that we don't necessarily want to put a buffer on this thing. Well, one, if we're using super sport paint and we're putting water base over the top, we don't have to abrade. That can be a huge blessing. And it also plays into what finish sheen are we going to use. If we're using a extra matte like we did on here, I don't have to be as concerned as the paint being, you know, ultra smooth before I put my finish on, because it's not going to tend to show every little, you know, bubble, piece of debris, undulation in the paint. But if I'm putting gloss on it, it is going to show everything. So then I'm probably going to want to abrade, but maybe in this case hand braid, right? Because I'm just trying to abrade for a little bit of smoothness, not for adhesion, so I don't have to overdo it. Anytime I put any type of abrasion on the floor and I hit those shoulders and open them up, now I've got some repair work to do. One other thing we had happen is we missed a part of the stencil. So we pulled the stencil to put the gray on, or to put the white on, but we missed part of the stencil, and we took it off later, and it shows you how white it is actually underneath. And just drives home again the point when you're abrading, especially next to white, or even if we had light yellow up here, if I've got darker colors next to it, I'm abrading fine dust from these and grinding them into my white, so it discolors it a little bit. And we did clean this with the power scrubber, but it just shows how much that fine dust really gets ground down and discolors your white. So one thing we could have done is taken maybe a 240 grit diamond, gone back and just hand abraded the white to try to clean that up a little more. But again, we wanted to leave this just to show you that color difference that you may get when you're abrading next to white and, you know, spreading some of that dust in there. And again, point out, Super Sport paint, I don't have to abrade if I'm putting water base over the top. But if I do, there's some things I want to watch out for.
Going back to braiding, you know, water-based, it is good for, you know, 48, 72 hours depending on humidity. But if you do wait past that, you do need to get in a braid. So always pay attention to those instructions, because there are some variables there that can come back into play.
Yeah, a couple other repairs. So we did, when we were taking the stencil off, we ripped off some corners. We had to do a repair here. Now this repair isn't great. We didn't do a good job taping this off, making sure we had coverage. I think we ripped this corner off. We had a little piece come off down here. Now to repair that, we just took, again, just our painter's tape. We just taped that off right there. But still, when we did our repair with our paint, I'm feathering across going with the grain. All right, that tends to blend everything in a lot nicer. And then when we abraded that, I just took a maroon pad, just lightly abraded it by hand just to blend in any edge I might have had on that repair, just to make everything kind of cohesive and one piece. Otherwise, everything went pretty smooth with this. I'm putting the second stencil down, but the shoulders is probably the biggest thing we want you guys to keep an eye out for. Know that you could smooth those down a little bit before you put your second stencil on and add more colors. Definitely be aware of them when you go back to a braid, that you don't open any of those up.
Hey guys, so we're back here now again talking about another application with a two-part stencil. With this one, this is a little bit more fun because we got a little bit more creative with this one. As you can see, you know, you've got your stencil, and you can go from there. You can go paint, you can go glaze, you can go stain, or you can bring all three of those together and create a very unique design. For this one, we did the first stencil with stain, so you can really see how pretty and how beautiful that came out. We'll get into a little bit more, but we'll talk about how to really get those crisp lines during this process, because there are some nice little tips and tricks to get there. And then from there we went on to paint, and so you know, you can really get colors to pop really, really well, and not only that, have a real nice smooth transition from your normal look of your floor to that logo itself, and kind of bring that all together. So a really, really neat look on this one here.
Yeah, and I really like the different sheen levels that we did here. Once we coated everything with matte, we masked off the logo and then the outside, and then we coated it with gloss, and it really kind of makes the contrast between the two and really pops out that logo, and it kind of just catches your eye and draws you like right to it. So I really like that idea.
Absolutely. So some of the tips you came across from doing this little project here, I think one that's worth mentioning is how clean this crisp this came out. Whenever you're doing a stain, I mean, it's really about re-rolling or using some tips along the edges. So kind of tell us how you did that on this one.
Yeah, so once we, like that roller that we showed earlier, roll back through your stencil for sure. What you would like to also do is just Make sure you're getting a nice tight your stencil to the raw wood, and just use your squeegee just to help press that all in there. And then, like you also mentioned, is that when you're staining, you don't want to push the stain back into your stencil. You want to feather it away from it, and that'll help kind of keep it from bleeding underneath. But you know, also out here would be more important. If we're underneath the paint, that may not be as critical as an issue. So
Yeah.
some other things you may notice is that some of these points are very straight. We did have some that didn't show up quite as well. So what we did is we had to cut those out and then tape them. We kept this one a little more round, but some of these are very clean. So.
Now, overall, it gives you a good example of how creative you can get with using a stencil. You get a very clean, very easy, which will help speed up that process, but then you can get very creative with that overall look and how you want to make that a very unique design on that floor. So a lot of cool stuff here that you can do, and you know, follow your tips and tricks, and you come out with something really good looking.
Okay, guys, this couple different elements on this floor. One is we have just regular red mahogany stain, intense seal, but then red mahogany stain and Cortline's maroon paint mixed together. So we wanted to show kind of mixing those elements, again, making kind of a custom stain out of one of our paint colors, and then coming back and showing some different design techniques on top of that. So with this, then we're just going back with the straight maroon paint. So kind of tone on tone, right? We've already got some maroon paint in here, so it really kind of highlights or accents coming back with the straight maroon paint. And sometimes, you know, that can make it pop, or it can make it a little more subtle, right? Because we've got tone on tone, it blends in a little bit, doesn't make it pop out so much. You can see over on the intense seal side, if we're just going with a natural floor, really how those colors stand out a little bit more. And then when we did this side, now I'm talking about contrast and how adding just one other color, but something that really contrasts with what you've already got down, can really make this thing pop out. So just adding some white, and then you know, hopscotching those where I've got white maroon, and how much that adds to the intensity of this design versus just doing all of a single color. So you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to have a whole Crayola box full of colors, right? Even just having two colors can really make your designs pop. One thing I will talk about as we did this stencil, and it's just one of those little things that can make a big difference when you're pulling stencil pieces off, is use a utility knife, right? To take off these little pieces inside. So you stick the tip of the knife right in the corner and pry it up towards the inside just so you can get a finger on it, and then you can peel it off. What I did here on this A, you'll notice that there's a little dig there. That's because I tried to get it off with my fingernail. And when I did that, I dug some of the paint off of that side. So really I should have gone back and touched that up, because this should all be covered up with paint, you know, and be a little crisper like the one in the maroon paint is. I dug that one out with my fingernail too, so I thought I could do it with the white as well. But that was a mistake. It's going to cost me a little extra time to go back and fix that up. So just one of those little tips. But again, custom stain color, regular stain, natural floor, having a single color paint so that you kind of, you know, have an accent and kind of it blends in or melds in. But then having really focusing more on some contrast and doing something, you know, dark, light, really make that pop. And you can take simple designs, make them look super cool. Hey everyone, we're back with another two-part stencil, but this one caused us some issues and sent us on a little adventure. First thing that we did is we messed up the base stencil. Actually, we didn't mess it up, we messed up the floor. So we had to go back, resand the floor, but before we did, we're like, we gotta pull this stencil up. We don't have another one, what do we do? So we went out and got some tracing paper, just at, you know, Michael's or Hobby Lobby. You can get these larger pads. Come in really handy, especially for doing some of this other custom work. A lot of people use tracing paper to transfer then their design to the floor, and then you can use tape and other stuff to kind of secure the edges or whatever. So before we took that stencil off the floor, we created a template from that. This was for our base layer, and actually this is just the middle part that we cut out, and we used then the outside of it, taped it down to then create our stencil using tape to secure those edges. Then we pulled that up, and we also used glaze as our base. So as you saw in one of the other two-part stencils that we did, we used stain on the base. Again, you don't always have to use paint, paint, paint. You can use glaze, you can use stain, you could use a custom stain. Lots of different things you can do there. So we put a glaze down first, then we put the second stencil down, used all paint, but we did some different things there too.
One tip I learned from doing this is really taping off the areas that, if you have multiple colors going on, taping off the areas that you don't want that color to bleed into. So taped off the eye here and was able to roll the red all the way across here. And that really just made my life a lot easier when I was trying to feather the color. Didn't have to worry about that getting painted red. Something else you can kind of, that you might want to keep an eye on is these registration marks. For the first stencil, even though we pulled it up and removed it, we marked it, and then we were able to put the second one down. So just the registration marks really make your life a lot easier when you're putting down that second stencil.
Yeah, we also had a little bit of an issue with the second stencil in that we had, as you can see here, a lot of wrinkles. And definitely because of this thicker material, you have a wrinkle, you're going to have a run. So we cut out a number of areas on this and just replaced it with tape, and then retrace the stencil design into that, just so we'd have crisper lines. The other thing that we left in was a couple things. One is there was some red paint that got over onto the white a couple places here. So I sanded that back off. Now, I'd want to go back and touch that up before we go ahead and pull the second stencil. However, sometimes you just miss stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and pull the stencil just to show then afterwards how do we do a repair on something like that. And basically we'll use the delicate surface 3M painter's tape that you can see through. That way we can put that down, trace around it to recreate a stencil or an outline for us, and easily go back and repaint that white where we need to. Then again, customization, right? We instead of just leaving this gold, and actually just did one coat of gold on this and 2 coats of gold on the eye, because even though they're the same color, I wanted them to look a little different. I really wanted this eye to stand out and pop a little bit. But then I wanted to paint just a little bit of design, see if we could, make that a little fancier on that big amulet that he's got on his ear there as part of his helmet. And then maybe make this eye stand out a little bit by just doing a little outline on the pupil area with some red. So we're going to see how this turns out. We're going to go ahead and peel it and see how our design worked. So again, you can see using glaze underneath, kind of like using stain, but there we've got a much more infinite palette of colors to use if we're using glaze. Look like using our tape, substituting the tape, cutting out some of the parts of the stencil where we had bad wrinkles, really helped us keep crisp lines throughout our stencil area. Just adding a little bit of design work to there, a little bit of touch of color up there. And then again, we'll have to come back with just our painter's tape, recreate the stencil around here so we can touch up that white. Otherwise, pretty cool design, using some different colors, some different techniques, some different mediums with glaze and paint to create a one-of-a-kind design. Hey everyone, this section we're going to talk a little bit about, just block lettering or making your own stencils, paint on paint. Some of you may recognize this letter here. This is in honor of our, usually our webinar member who couldn't be here, Dee Lenston, who's out leading a lot of our live training. He happens to be a member of the Ohio State family, but some of us like some other teams a little bit better. So Dee, you can guess who this is, but this is all for you. So if you watch the second segment, we created this stencil out of tape. You don't have to have a stencil that's cut out of stencil material. You can make your own. So we taped it off, we used some measurements, taped it off, and we created the outline of this first. And the problem with, as Phil talked about on one of our other segments, in having two-part stencils, and we used to have this problem in the gyms that we did at first, is again having that bleed area or that shoulder, and then we were always exposing that shoulder when we would go back and abrade the letters before we put on finish. So always a ton of touch-up work. So Prater's Floors down in Chattanooga, who I've learned a ton from, they're a great sport customer of ours, and really, really good craftsmen and just thinkers of processes and making improvements. They said, look, we keep doing the same thing, getting the same results, and finally it dawned on them one day, hey, let's quit putting the second stencil down. There's no need to. If we put the first stencil down and we have our outline, all we need to do is tape it off to make that inside area by itself, and we can just do it right up to the line so that we've got paint going to paint. We don't need paint going up on top of paint. Made a whole lot more sense. Really panicked us the first time they sent us just outline stencils for one of the test jobs that we did, and no secondary stencils. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. But then they talked us through it, and we made our way, and it turned out a lot better. You'll also, if you remember from the videos, the past webinars, what we did is to do this second area, we actually used, again, just 3M delicate surface tape on this side, and then we used some R tape on this side. We had a few problems there. Phil can also fill us in on maybe a little bit better way to use the R tape, because we had a ton of bleeds here that we're then going to have to go back and fix, probably with a little sandpaper, maybe with a little light scraper to fix those before we go ahead, or maybe we'll just tape it off and paint blue over those to touch those up before we go ahead. Maybe abrade everything lightly and then put our finish coats. But Phil, how about just prepping the floor, getting ready for
Sure, yeah, and going back to that, I mean, having to go back and touch this up, that's the last thing you want to do. It might happen, it's not going to say it's never going to happen, but there are things you can do to help prevent that or really minimize that from happening. And it really starts early. And if you're doing seal coats, one thing we've seen over the years is that if you're doing a 4-coat system, you're doing 1 coat of seal, a 2nd coat of seal. Between those 2 seal coats, you're going to get a little grain raise from that first, especially if you're using water base. You're going to get a little grain raise. We like to knock those down and then put your 2nd coat of seal down so that when that dries out, you get a nice smooth surface, which is going to help get a better seal when you put your stencil or tape down. And I think doing that little step might help prevent some of these. Again, when you get your stencils down, get your tape down, always best practice to re-roll before you paint. That's just going to help re-adhere that down to the surface and create that seal, so we can prevent these from happening. They happen, but they are somewhat preventable.
And then again, just talking about, okay, now we've got this down. After we touch those up, we'll be ready to put finish on it. Do we abrade or not abrade? And being super sport paint, putting water base on top, we don't have to abrade for adhesion, only really for smoothness. And again, I'm probably, even though I went paint to paint here and I have a much smoother overall application, still going to want to do a lot of this by hand. Clean it up with a power scrubber, because I will take this blue dust and grind it into my yellow, which is going to, again, it's going to affect the tone of that a little bit. So if I can avoid abrading at all, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want to do.
I mean, pay attention to your times. Always pay attention to your humidities, your temperatures. All those things can certainly play a factor if you are trying to get it done before that hot coat window closes. I mean, all those things are important to pay attention to. But overall, you get this process down, I mean, you can pump some pretty good looking logos out fairly quick and pretty accurate.
Is there a general amount of time? So I just got done with my paint. And are there X number of days where, hey, if it's been 7 days or whatever, I should go back and just lightly abrade to ensure better adhesion? I'm not going to get adhesion failure, but just to get better adhesion.
Definitely. I mean, and that's good to know. And just in general, I mean, this is a 2-color, logo here. I mean, we've done 4 or 5 color logos in one day. I mean, you get on it pretty quick without having to hot coat it. But again, paying attention to those temperatures and time. In general, if you're waiting, I mean, it's really 48 hours to 72 hours is kind of that window with water-based paint. If it's higher humidities, you're closer to that 70, the 72 hours. If you're drier, like we are here in Colorado, you definitely want to stay closer to that 48. And that's with water-based. If you are going oil on top, we do recommend an oil, in a braid before you put oil. Another little trick, I think we've addressed it before, but if you don't want to, and you have real clean lines or real clean, design here, and you don't want to abrade it, but you are going to go oil, throw a coat of Intense Seal on top of everything to kind of encapsulate all of your paint. That way, when you go back to abrade it before you coat it with oil, you're abrading that clear coat of Intense Sealer and not the paint itself, so that you can help ensure that adhesion without having to worry about getting the dust into other colors. So a couple tricks there that definitely help.
Yeah. So again, getting a floor ready for paint by putting a coat of sealer down, abrading that first one, then putting your second one down. Something I learned today, I mean, it sounds like a much better process. Using tape to create your outline first, then it's much easier to tape and make this inside only available so I don't have shoulders and stuff that I have to worry about. And then watch your timeline afterwards. If it's been more than 48 hours since you put paint down, you might have to lightly abrade it with a conditioning pad. Then hit it with a power scrubber to really help clean up that fine dust. You might even have to come back and just lightly abrade by hand with maybe a 240 diamond, just the yellow. If you really kind of discolored it with some of that blue dust too much somewhere, then go ahead and put your coats on. So hope some of that helps you, and making block letters or anything like this, your own two-part stencils, not too hard to do if you just think through the process a little bit.
Hi, so here we are again with another example of what you can do with a stencil. We just have a template. I mean, that's kind of what we use it as, just that base template, so you have your really nice clean design. But from there, you can get as creative as you want or as customized as you want with each segment or with different colors or different looks. We could have certainly added more to this if we wanted to. We could have used an airbrush on the edges. I mean, it just gives you a lot more creativity, ability to get creative with a very, very clean look when you use stencils like this. Bobby, I know you put this together and had a little tips to provide us on this one.
Yeah, first we used the Nordic seal on the bottom, 2 coats of that, and that really helped pop out that stencil more. Kind of created like a custom look for this, for the customer. And some the other colors that we went with, we kind of just mixed the different in there. Like you said, we could have really went with different ideas there. We could have used maybe like a brown tone here for like a wood design, maybe some silver for like the top of that. One thing I like to just point out is that when we were doing the different colors, we did have a little bleed over the side. So just take a razor blade and just kind of scrape that off and clean that up real quick before you coat it. But also when you're pulling that second stencil, just you want to make sure you're being very careful with all these sharp points like this. Less likely to pull the color when you do that.
Hey everyone, back for the last segment, last panel in our 16 panel sport series here. And this is creating a custom stain design, but a real design and not just anything free form. So, there's some measurements and stuff we want to do, some geometry we're going to have to use, maybe even some trigonometry we're going to have to use. Everybody should have a good set of trammel points. So that you can definitely set up your 90 degrees, your 45 degrees, anything beyond that as well. And if you're a good floor guy, you should be well versed in how to use those. We're not going to show that here. We'll have another segment later on where we'll show how to use trammel points to do stuff like that. The big question that came up on doing a design like this, though, is how do I get crisp stain lines, right? Because I'm working on white oak. Red oak would be even worse, much more open grain design there. And I'm going to tend to have a lot of bleed down my soft grain. So there's several methods that we can use. We tried out, I think, 4 different ones, came up with 2 that I think really worked pretty well, and some other ideas people had that just didn't seem to work that well with what we were doing. So the first method that, again, didn't seem to work very well, but if you're doing this and it's working fine for you, then that's good. Go ahead and keep doing it. And that's sanding the edge of your paint or your tape before you put your stain down. And I believe the philosophy or the physics behind this is that the Sandpaper, one, just the pressure will push the tape into the floor a little bit more, and maybe the heat generated by the sandpaper will activate the adhesive in the tape a little more to make it stick down in that grain pattern a little more. That didn't tend to work that well for us. We tried that here, actually on the brown tone, and really on anywhere where we had these edge grain, not anything running in line with the grain, but we had a lot of bleed. I mean, there just wasn't a good way to stop it. The other thing I don't like about this, unless you're using the exact same grit that you used to do the floor with, if I get off of my tape anywhere and I'm rubbing this on the wood, then I may be changing the look of the stain and the way it takes right there. Plus, any place that, you know, if I was rubbing my tape here and I'm going cross grain, now I'm creating cross grain scratches in the floor. So for those couple reasons, I don't like the sandpaper method so well. Another method that came up that did seem to work pretty well is back of a spoon. So kind of the same thought philosophy as the sandpaper in that you're generating some heat and some pressure. So if you take the back of the spoon and you rub it along the floor, one, you'll feel like it gets hot pretty quickly. In fact, you might want to wear a glove to do this because you definitely want it to get hot, again, because it will make that adhesive a little more flowing, and maybe it gets down there in that grain and, you know, shuts that off a little more so your stain doesn't flow down in there. So this method seemed to work pretty well. One caution I would have here, though, again, is I don't want to change the look that the stain has on the wood. So I still want to be careful if I get this spoon out on my wood, because it may burnish it, especially if I water pop. If I water pop the floor, I'm not using the spoon method, because any little divergency out onto the floor is going to close that pop grain down. I'm definitely going to have a line in the floor. But otherwise, this method did seem to work pretty good on a regularly prepared floor. We used that on this side. And, you know, you can see on my cross grain section here, I got a little bit of bleed, but it did a much cleaner job than my sandpaper section over here. The thing that seems to work the best, though, is using some type of blade to outline your design. And I think it works best for this reason, kind of twofold. One is, as I take my blade and I run it down my line. Also, if you're doing this and you're doing longer lines, make sure you get a really nice, long, thick, straight edge like this, because you always want to put a knee or something else on it to just stabilize it so you can make that longer run. And I'm just taking it, I'm not putting a ton of pressure on it, but I'm definitely making a mark down into the floor. And as I'm doing that, one, it's creating a little channel where the stain pigment is going to sit. And then the other thing that it's doing is that blade is cutting through that open grain and kind of shutting the door on it. So now I don't think, because I cut through it and kind of press those two sides together, I don't think the stain as it gets down there can go through that open pore anymore, because I kind of, again, shut the door on it. Now, what do you use for that? Again, for long straight edges or short edges, anything that's straight, use your straight edge. You could use just a regular utility knife as well, but I'd really recommend getting one of these thicker X-Acto knives. It's got typically a thicker handle on it. It's easy to put into your fingers, even for guys with bigger hands, I think, to use. This is nice, and you can do detail work with it. So if I have straight lines, pretty easy to do because I can use a straight edge as my guide. If I've got curvy lines and stuff, so one, I'm either gonna have to set up some type of jig then if I'm gonna do all of these circles and stuff in there to trace those, or if I'm gonna freehand it, I've just got to have really good control over my blade. And I think with this X-Acto knife, you could follow along there pretty easily and smoothly and have a nice outline. Although I'd still, for something like that, I would still try to make up some type of jig where I could center it here and then just draw it around, almost like my trammel points, right? I may try to make something out of this to help ensure that nice, smooth, even circle all the way around. So those are the 3 methods, but the 2 we'd really recommend for giving the best crisp lines. Absolute best was using a knife blade to trace a little channel all around your design. And maybe in conjunction with that is even using a spoon to generate a little heat and pressure up on top of your tape and help push that adhesive back down into the floor. Use one or both of those in combination and you should be able to do designs like this, come out with nice crisp lines and save yourself a lot of repair work going back and taking out all those bleed marks. One other thing though that you could do in a design like this, if you do get a number of bleed marks, you could always then put a couple coats of sealer on it and then outline, put some thin outlines on here and make some thin runs of paint up on top of your sealer, right? So if I just put lines like that all the way around and outlined my design with paint, and again, I've made sure to press my tape down so that my paint doesn't then bleed. It would be a nice little highlight to your design, and it would get rid of all of your bleed marks with the stain without having to go back and do all those by hand. So hope those tips help in helping you guys do some really cool stain designs like this. And that's just one more of the possibilities that we've got for our sport techniques for custom residential and commercial floors. Hey everyone, welcome back. So we're wrapping up again this 3-part series on Bona Sport techniques for custom residential and commercial. Hope you learned a lot. I know the 3 of us did in working on this project for a number of weeks, not just 3 weeks, but a lot in between too. And again, practice a little bit. Use your notes from these 3 webinars to set up your own little practice sessions on your test floors. But Bob, if we go back again, just a couple things you want to leave everybody with on just some key points to take away.
Sure, yeah. Well, maybe one thing is that you put a lot of work into this, so thank you for really showing me a lot of these different things. I mean, a lot of these were your different ideas, and I learned a lot while we're doing this. But some of the other things that we kind of learned on some of the logos and designs is when we were painting these, we kind of went with hand detail. We didn't throw machines on a lot of these because we were afraid of going through, kind of like some of our other screw-ups that we had.
That was me.
But so yeah, be kind of gentle with some of these paints and logos. A lot easier to just do some minor touch-ups, or if you bring a big machine on it, you might just start all the way over. So kind of be gentle on a lot of these paints.
Yeah, that's a good point in that unlike, if we call it standard residential and commercial where you don't have any designs on the floor, it's just stain and finish or whatever, you're typically taking a big machine and running it over the whole floor, and you don't have to pay that much attention to the detail. But when you've got a piece of artwork now on the floor, you really want to protect that thing. So sometimes it takes a little love and special care and some hand work.
Finesse.
Yeah. Phil, how about from your side?
Yeah, again, thank you guys for inviting me. This has been great, and a lot of really cool stuff came out of this. So appreciate being a part of this. But one of a couple of the takeaways I'd like to say is really get creative. I mean, that's what this really opens the door for, is creativity and to have a little fun and just find your style and find different styles. So I mean, there's a lot of cool things you can do with that. The other part is really to take your time. Pay attention to detail. Don't cut corners, because you try to do that, most times you're going to run into issues. You're going to have to come back and fix it. So always take the time, pay attention to detail, and get creative, have fun with it. I think that's what's going to be really neat about this whole process. Yeah, and as Phil said, and as you guys saw as we went through each panel, it's really the small things. So it's fixing a corner of a piece of paint that either got torn off. It's not trying to use your fingernail to get small pieces of stencil out and then you tear away some more of the paint. It's not putting a buffer on glaze before you put sealer on it because somebody told you not to do that and you went ahead and did it anyway, right? So it's usually the small things, just like everything else, that's going to make the big differences in your jobs coming out successful when you do these sort of things. And it's also not just paint, stain, glaze, but it's looking at your different colors of sealers, amber seal, Nordic seal, natural seal, how can those add? It's making custom stains with Cortlines paint and DriFast natural stain.
It's doing glazes with Super Sport Paint and Intent Seal or DTS Sport Seal. And then like you saw, we also use different sheens of finish to highlight different areas too. So there's so many different elements that you can mix up to come up with some cool designs that just take it so far beyond a regular residential or commercial job. So start thinking about those, get super creative, and have some fun with it. That's what it's about. That's also what your customers want to see. They want to have some fun with their floors. They want their floors to pop. You can really have a great time delivering on this and do some Bona Sport techniques to create some custom residential and commercial jobs. So we're going to sign off. Thank you guys again for being here. Don't forget about our podcast with Wayne and Rob. You can pick those up anywhere where you generally download your podcasts. You can see more of our training videos on the Bona Professional YouTube channel. Or if you need to join one of our live Bona training sessions, you can sign up on our Bona.com website or call our tech and training team or any of your Bona sales managers if you have a question. You can call them at 1-800-872-5515. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks Bob and Phil for being here. Thank you guys for your time and your interest in watching more about Bona products.